First, though, the legislation to enable the devolution of policing and justice is making its way at speed through Westminster. Indeed, according to many politicians, is going through at an indecent rate of knots. What's the point in all this alacrity with no immediate prospect of an agreed date for the actual transfer of powers? Alex Maskey, however fast it's going through the Commons and the Lords, it doesn't make any difference to when it will actually come here, does it?
Well, we'll see in time, Noel, but obviously it does make a difference. It's actually a very important difference because there was a process set out by both Martin McGuinness and Peter Robinson back in November. That's a 5-stage process, and that involves a whole series of discussions, some of which are concluded and some of which are still ongoing. Part of that is about legislation which has to go through the British Parliament, and part of it will be legislation required in the Assembly. So yesterday's legislation going through in the time allocated to it was very important. So it's another very important welcome step.
Yeah, but it isn't, is it? It doesn't bring it any closer, does it?
Well, actually, if it wasn't there, it can't happen.
That's true.
But
it could happen the day before a date set for actual transfer.
Well, you go in there and talk that over with the British Prime Minister and get parliamentary time allocated. And it's interesting that a number of parties, including some local parties here, were actually trying to block the progress of the bill through the British Parliament yesterday, and they need to explain that themselves at a later point. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a very welcome and necessary step, because without that piece of legislation going through yesterday, we can't have transfer, and the need to have transfer is self-apparent. We need to have transfer of matters on policing and justice into the hands of locally elected representatives, because people on a day-and-day basis are crying out.
Well,
have a
everyone's
safer
agreed to
community.
DUP agreed to that. It's a matter of when, though, isn't it? I mean,
well, let's work on the when, but the how has to be followed through legislation and other matters, and this is another very important step to get that through the British Parliament yesterday.
Alex Attwood, your party leader, was very exercised in the Commons yesterday, talking about the government conniving to dismantle the inclusivity of the agreement, a pretence of imminence, the bill injecting fresh uncertainty into the process. Why is he so exercised?
Well, I think there's two reasons. The first is that, for reasons that are still beyond me, the DUP and Sinn Féin agreed to dismantle the democratic entitlements that were hard won and hard negotiated in the Good Friday Agreement. That's point one. The second point is...
Well, because they couldn't have agreed on a nationalist or unionist party taking it, so let's give it to somebody else. It makes sense, does it not?
But these protections for nationalism were hard won in the Good Friday Agreement, and then Sinn Féin sold the pass and have done the DUP's bidding by unpicking the guarantees and protections of the Good Friday Agreement. The second reason why the SDLP are highly exercised is that we're not one day closer to a date for devolution of justice. And remember, 100 days ago, our government was held up for 150 days. What? Over the issue about a date for devolution of justice. And we are not one day closer to it. And this is important, Peter, or Noel. Last week in the House of Commons, Peter Robinson rose and interrupted Nigel Dodds to put it on public record that no end date, to use his words, had been agreed.
But he did say in the debate yesterday that he honestly believes support for devolution is growing, and they have said all along, the DUP, that they won't do it until they believe the support is there. He says, Peter Robinson, the party leader, First Minister, says the support is growing.
And that's warm words. And at the same time, Nigel Dodds was outside the House of Commons saying that community confidence does not yet exist, as the DUP define it, to have devolution.
But it's growing.
It may well
so
be
it's
growing.
Coming closer.
It may be closer. But Sinn Féin said this time last year that there was unionist confidence for devolution of justice. And a year later, there is no unionist confidence for the devolution of justice. Last September, Gerry Adams said and wrote to the Assembly that he thought there could be a date for devolution of justice agreed within 2 weeks. 6 months later, there is no date for devolution of justice.
Let's clarify.
Those are the realities.
Okay.